Okay, and so we have reached the Minnesota Wild at Scouching here for the 2022 NHL Draft Recap Series. The Minnesota Wild were quite busy on draft day. They had 8 picks, and I thought they did really well, all things considered. And that does not surprise me because Judd Brackett is leading the way there, and that guy knows what he's doing. So they picked a guy that was in my top 10 at 19 in Liam Ogren. I mean, of the 3 Djurgården boys, he was the one that I think is the most projectable to the NHL as like a good NHL player, right? Like, I think with Ogren, he's the type of player I think that when things are in crunch time and you really want to either protect a lead or grind out a win or something like that because skill and speed isn't really doing it. Not that Ogren doesn't have those things. You put Liam Ogren out on the ice. I think he's a player that if he just gets a hair quicker and more fluid on his pivots with his footwork, he could be a much more physically intense player successfully than he was this year for me. He was very often involved in play, but was often one of the worst defensive rush shutdown wingers that I've tracked this year. But I don't hold that against him. I tracked a lot of him in the SHL, and at least he was trying, right? I mean, he is a very, very talented all-around hockey player, really nice shooter, really creative playmaker at times, really no nonsense at other times, really good straight-line skater, gets up the ice really, really well. You know, if you don't get a guy like Marco Kasper in the draft, then Liam Ogren is a more than okay replacement in Minnesota. So I really, really like the Liam Ogren pickup. He was in my top 10 just because I looked at him and went, this is an NHL player that you can trust one day. I mean, you just know when looking at him. And I think that's a big reason why he was so productive in the junior level this year. He just, everywhere he was either, physically getting through guys or physically imposing himself on guys, and can also play with skill and has some good straight line speed, beating out loose puck races and all that fun stuff. So I also felt that of the Djurgården boys, he was the most comfortable looking in the SHL, most consistently over the course of the year. So I think with him, there's a lot to like as he is now. And assuming he gets stronger and a bit quicker and just sort of keeps his style of play consistent, I think he'll be just a very, very good, maybe not super productive, but very, very good all-around NHL player. And again, they drafted a good value pick, in my view, in Danila Yurov at 24. I had Yurov ranked a little lower than average. I thought he would go later than my tracked average ranking of 14.8. I thought he would go a little later than that. That just felt, based on what I had seen of him at the KHL level especially, just a little bit out there. But I didn't have him much later. I had him at 16, and getting him at 24 I think is a really good bet. I honestly thought he was going to go to Washington at 20, but I mean, Yurov is a really, really, again, well-rounded player. He's really smart. He's got a pretty good shot. He's a really simple but creative playmaker in the offensive zone. Maybe not the most defensively intense guy you're going to find, but just reads the game really well. Knows how to create just enough space from guys so that he can sort of make a play. The problem for me is that once he was in the KHL, all of that kind of dried up, and he was much less effective. And, he was good off puck, finding scoring chances. And I think that there were some situations where, if you want to count what I would call like almost points, he does that. He did that a few times in the games I saw in the KHL, where it just, if things had gone, flip a coin, and if it came up tails, but if it come up heads, he would have a goal or an assist. And that happened a couple of times. So, and it's why I don't really worry myself too much with KHL production with guys this young. But I also look at Yurov and think, okay, if I'm a KHL coach, I can see why I'm not playing him, more than the bare minimum that I have to, because he's not really moving the needle at that level and needs other guys to sort of help him out. But that's not a dig at Danila Yurov. I think he's a really well-rounded and smart player, and just the better he gets, pretty much across the board, he's a nice blank slate to work with a really good sort of hockey mind. And I think for Minnesota, like, as well as Liam Ogren, like, they get 2 really well-rounded wingers that they can work with over the next little while. At 47, they took Hunter Height. Now, I didn't have Hunter Height ranked because I don't really trust myself to know better than NHL teams when it comes to how far they think a player can come in a relatively quick period of time. Because I watched Hunter Height this year, and yes, he's got a very gifted set of hands. He's very sort of shifty and creative and evasive, but he's not really doing much with it. Or at least when I watched him with Barrie this year and I tracked a few games, he wasn't really doing a whole lot with it. I'll pull up his track data here just to show you. So again, I didn't track a ton of Hunter height, but I did stop because I kind of figured out I was kind of looking at a player where I just wasn't the biggest fan. Just across the board, everything was just very mediocre. If you have an offensive threat of 14 at the OHL level, like, that's not very notable. Not passing the puck a whole lot, but completing his passes decently well. You know, when he got involved in defensive transitions, he was pretty good at breaking up those pucks, and I feel like he does have a bit of stick skill in terms of the defensive side of the game as well. I mean, I think that with his hands and the creativity that he did show once in a while with the puck on his stick, I think he could be one of these guys that pops next year in the OHL after missing last season. I mean, I don't know. I did track a little bit of height at the end of the year, and I just don't know how to honestly evaluate players who lost a season the year before and still haven't quite got back to game shape when it's like 6 or 7 months into the season. You know, is that just the player is a year behind everyone else? How big of a factor is that? I don't really know. And maybe this is a situation where when I don't have Hunter height ranked and in 3 years he's in the NHL scoring 80 points, I go, okay, like, there's other stuff that I just don't know and probably can't really identify, at least when situations like the COVID season being lost happens. But Hunter height, I think, of the OHL guys, like, he's got some of the more talented hands and creativity with the puck that I think you'll find out of the guys that weren't in that top group. I would have drafted someone else that high, but it's not the end of the world, I don't think. But I think that Minnesota could have aimed a little higher than taking a chance on Hunter height. But I'll trust Judd Brackett. They may have very, very specific information where they think he's going to, you know, really take off next year, and I think that's possible. At 56, they took Ryger Lorenz, which is literally right where he was kind of ranked on average. I had him a little lower, but this is a decent range for Lorenz. Again, I think in this 40 to 65 range, there was a lot of really good players that sort of slipped through the cracks. To me, Ryger Lorenz was not one of them. Like, I feel like he'll be an NHL player. He's very resilient on the puck, really strong moving pucks up the ice himself. You know, just a kind of a really good straight line, hard-nosed guy. Again, he's another one of these guys where when he went to the U18s, I'm going, okay, this is his chance, right? This U18 team, without all these guys that they could have, Ryger Lorenz is going to get a ton of ice time. We'll see what he can do, and that team just could not get anything done. And watching Ryger Lorenz, a lot of people were talking about his production and stuff all year long, and I just did not see that really projecting super well. And at the U18s, you kind of see why. Like, he's big and strong and resilient, but he doesn't really problem solve super well. The skill level's not quite there yet. He's not the quickest guy in the world, just a big, strong dude who can get up the ice and sort of power his way through the game. We'll see how it goes. I mean, there are players in the NHL that can do that. And at 56, I think he's acceptable. Again, there just were other higher upside guys that I think I would have swung on if I were the Minnesota Wild. But I understand also that there are some philosophical differences that I've picked up on between myself and how this team drafts, because as much as I see a lot of the same things that they see, there's also other stuff that I think I either devalue or miss, which happens. But at 89, they drafted Mikey Milne, and I know for a fact that he was going to get drafted, and I figured, you know, there was one team specifically that told me, like, if he's available later on, we're drafting him. And I feel like that was the case with a few teams, and so Minnesota just said, we're just going to do it. Of the re-entry guys, I think he was one of the better ones out there, and I think that, yes, he is a bit on the older side, but I think he could be perhaps ready for an AHL job, but maybe going back for an overage year with Winnipeg might make sense. You know, he's creative and he's quick and agile. You know, he doesn't really have a ton of like separation speed, but he's quick enough where I think he can make it work at the junior level. I really have come to like Mikey Milne after watching him the last 2 seasons. I thought he would get drafted last year, but, you know, his sample was a little strange last year, but I thought he was worth taking a chance on. But here, I'm pleasantly surprised to see him drafted this high. I don't think there's massive NHL upside, but he's an undersized but skilled and agile little guy. And I think that there's, you know, he's a hardworking player as well, and I think that could take him a ways with the Minnesota Wild. So we'll see where he goes. At 121, Ryan Healy was actually one of the more sort of in my back pocket, like, this guy's kind of neat kind of players of the year. Like, I have been watching Ryan Healy for 2 years. after watching him with Sioux Falls last year, I believe. When I was watching Brent Johnson, Ryan Healy kind of caught my eye quite a few times. But I've always wondered why he doesn't score more. And because he's got the hands, he's got the sort of confident ability to sort of step up from the blue line, deceive play in the neutral zone with the puck, and sort of play around in creative ways. And I just haven't seen it project into goal scoring or production, to say, of any kind this year. But he did produce more as the year went on, I believe. The first half, he was kind of slow in terms of scoring. But his second half seemed a little bit better. I don't know. At 121, again, at 121, there weren't that many guys I would have really been pounding the table for. But if you really want to bet on his skill level and the fluidity on his feet and the confidence he's got, then absolutely, I think you can do that. So Healy, in my track data, didn't really show extraordinarily well, but you could see in the tape and in the video that there was something there with Healy that's worth sort of expanding on. At 153, they took David Spochek, who I've seen off and on over the course of the year. People were telling me to check him out and everything. I do see, again, kind of like that Ryan Healy vibe, where there's creativity, stepping up from the blue line, making plays. All that stuff, is kind of there, but I'm not sure of how it projects. I think with Spochek, you send him back to junior for a year, see where he is, and maybe you loan him back to Czechia next 2 years from now, or maybe you bring him to the AHL or something. But I don't really have high hopes for Spochek, considering the quality of play in the queue and how defensemen can find ways to produce there. But he's a nice, well-rounded guy that when I watched him after the draft, I'm going, all right, I can see why he got drafted. There's some deception and skill and sort of good footwork, but how good it will be down the road, we'll see. And Cervak Petrovsky was their last pick of the draft, and I was really surprised to see Cervak Petrovsky fall that low. Like, he's a really hard-working guy, sort of puts his head down and goes to work a lot of times on the ice when I watched him. He's shifty, maybe not the most skilled or the most agile guy, but he's kind of wired to be that. It seems like that's kind of how he's wired, with a bit of physical sort of resilience in there as well. And that's kind of the thread and the common element between Minnesota Wild draft picks. They seem to like these guys who can evade pressure or manage pressure pretty well. And Petrovsky, I think, does that. So I think Cervak Petrovsky is a really good swing to take in the late rounds of the draft. I mean, I wasn't so overwhelmed with him. Like, he was ranked on average at 95th, and a lot of people sort of had him kind of higher than 185 in the draft. But I saw him as a watch list guy for me. It's like, look, if he's a late round swing that you take and he's really young, I think you can bet on that. And I think the production is good enough, even though a lot of it was on the power play from what I can recall. I think there's a lot to like with Petrovsky, and who knows where he'll be in a few years. He's young, you've got runway, and I like the sort of way that his game is wired, so we'll see where he ends up. So, the Minnesota Wild, also, I thought it was a really, really strong draft from Minnesota. Again, another one. So they're getting a 1C that puts them way up at the top here. Do I like it more than Winnipeg's draft? I think so. I think I do. Do I like it more than Buffalo's draft? That's a toss-up, but considering they didn't have a top 10 pick and got a guy that I had in the top 10, I'll put them a shade above Buffalo. I thought Yurov was a great pickup. I thought Ogren was a great pickup for where they got him. I would have taken different guys in the second round over Height and Lorenz, and that's probably what holds them back from a 1B. But Milne, Healy, and Petrovsky as three of your last four picks, great. And if there's something I'm missing with David Spochek, I'll take the L, and it's at 153rd overall. But Spochek has some decent traits as well. So, being a little nitpicky in the second round, I think Minnesota could have nailed this draft into space. But not everything goes the way I want it to go, because that's life, to quote Tommy Wiseau. So yeah, but I thought it was a really, really, really strong draft from Minnesota, and maybe Hunter Height does have a pop-off season next year, and maybe Ryger Lorenz becomes a great bottom six, third-line NHL forward. So we'll see what happens, but again, a really, really strong draft from Minnesota. So that's it for this one. The next one we're going to be doing will be Pittsburgh, so we'll see you tomorrow for that one.